Jake's boots sank softly into the damp grass as he tugged the final tent peg deep into the dark, earthy soil. Morning mist curled off the still lake, drifting like spirits between ancient pine trunks. The crisp scent of fresh water mingled with the sharp aroma of pine sap, filling his chest with a quiet, anchoring peace. Birds trilled high in the branches, their songs weaving into the low hush of waves slapping the narrow shore. He straightened, arching his back until it cracked, and breathed in the dawn. For the first time in weeks, he felt the tension in his shoulders ease. He glanced at his reflection in the lake, noting how ragged he looked. His black t-shirt clung with sweat and dew, his brown hair tousled under a faded baseball cap. His beard was a few days past clean cut, but he didn't care. Here, there was no client presentation waiting, no unpaid invoices piled on his desk, no calls from developers screaming about foundation delays. Here, there was just him, the lake, and the cabin his grandfather built with his own hands. His gaze shifted to the weathered timber structure tucked under birches 100 feet back. The cabin's roof sagged slightly on one side where a storm had torn shingles away last winter. Repairing it was his weekend mission, but he wasn't going to rush. He'd slept in his truck the last 2 nights, windows down, to catch loons calling across the moonlit water, but today he wanted the scent of damp grass under canvas, like when his grandfather used to pitch a tent for him as a child. It was tradition, and it was peace. He wiped his palms on his jeans and turned to fetch the cooler from his truck. A crunch of approaching footsteps snapped his attention left. At first, he saw only the small dog waddling through the grass, a stiff-legged white puffball with a pink bow. Then he heard her voice. "What exactly do you think you're doing here?" Jake blinked as the woman emerged from behind a stand of willows. She was perfectly put together despite the damp dawn air. Honey blonde bob frozen under a thick layer of hairspray, crisp lilac blouse tucked into white capris, sunglasses perched on her head like a queen's tiara. Her lips were pressed so tightly together he wondered if she'd ever smiled in her life. "Morning," he said cautiously, setting the cooler down. "Just setting up camp." She scoffed, flicking invisible lint from her elbow. "On whose authority?" He frowned. "My own, I guess. This is my land." She let out a laugh, sharp enough to send nearby robins fluttering away. "Your land. Oh, honey. Everything within this lakeside is governed by the Pine Brook Shores HOA. Camping is strictly prohibited without board approval. And no one approved. This." She gestured at his modest 2-man tent as if it were a rotting corpse. Her little dog yipped at his boots, circling with frantic indignation. Jake kept his voice calm. "I understand how your HOA works, but this property isn't under HOA jurisdiction. It's a private parcel. My grandfather built the cabin here before the development even existed." She stepped closer, her perfume thick and cloying like wilted lilacs under midday sun. Her eyes were pale blue, cold and glassy, scanning him up and down with visible disgust. "I don't care who your grandfather was," she said. "You're in violation. Pack up that tent before I call security. This is not some redneck campground." He felt a flicker of anger, but smothered it under reason. "Ma'am, I have the deed in my truck if you'd like to see it." "This isn't HOA land. Don't call me ma'am." Her lips curled like she'd tasted something bitter. "It's Karen, and I don't need to see anything. I know this entire lakeshore falls under our environmental and aesthetic regulations." Jake exhaled, feeling heat flush his face despite the chill breeze coming off the water. "Listen, Karen, I'm not trying to start anything. It's here to fix up my grandfather's cabin and enjoy a quiet weekend. The tent is temporary." Karen's nostrils flared. Her dog barked again, straining at its rhinestone leash. She tugged it back sharply, eyes never leaving his face. "Temporary or not, it's an eyesore. It devalues the lakefront for everyone else." I'm calling security right now." She whipped out her phone and began stabbing at the screen with manicured nails. Jake felt his heart rate spike, a mix of disbelief and fury rising in his throat. This woman was serious. He could see it in the rigid set of her shoulders, the way her chest puffed with self-righteous indignation. He held up his hands in a placating gesture. "There's really no need for that. I promise I'll keep it neat and pack up if there's any real issue." Karen didn't even look at him as she pressed the phone to her ear. Her voice turned syrupy sweet as soon as the line connected. "Hello. Yes, this is Karen Blake, HOA Board President. I'm down at the lakeside near Lot 12. We have an illegal squatter setting up a tent on private HOA property. Yes, he's refusing to leave." Jake clenched his jaw. She paused, listening. Then her eyes flicked to him, narrowing with sudden gleeful calculation. "Yes," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He looks suspicious, possibly armed. Please send someone immediately, for our safety." Jake's mouth fell open. "Armed? Are you insane?" She ended the call without acknowledging him, sliding her phone back into her pocket with surgical finality. Her smile was thin and cold. "You'll regret this. You people think you can just come here, ruin the view, drag down property values. Not on my watch." With that, she spun on her heel, her dog trotting triumphantly behind her. Jake watched her walk away, fury and disbelief knotting in his stomach. The lake shimmered in the rising sun, silver and gold ripples dancing in the breeze, but his peace was gone. His pulse thudded heavy in his chest as he crouched to zip his tent flap shut. He felt the raw unfairness burning through his veins. All he'd wanted was quiet, to rebuild the cabin his grandfather loved. Now, he was about to be treated like a criminal on his own land. He forced himself to take a long, steady breath, feeling the cool morning air fill his lungs. He could hear Karen's voice drifting back through the trees as she ranted into another phone call. Probably to the entire HOA board this time. Jake knew she wouldn't stop. People like her never did, but as he watched a dragonfly skim across the lake surface, sunlight sparking off its wings, another feeling started to creep through the anger, something colder, sharper, resolve. If Karen wanted a war over his grandfather's land, she was about to learn what it meant to pick a fight with someone who had nothing left to lose. He stood slowly, watching the sun rise above the pines, burning away the mist. He would wait for security to arrive, and then he'd show them all exactly whose land this was. Jake didn't have to wait long. Within 20 minutes, the rhythmic crunch of gravel under tires shattered the quiet morning. He looked up from where he was stacking old firewood by the cabin and saw a sheriff's SUV rolling slowly down the dirt track that led to the lakeshore. Its lights weren't flashing, but the tension in his chest tightened anyway. The SUV stopped near his truck, and two deputies stepped out. The first was a tall man with a neatly trimmed gray beard, sunglasses hiding his eyes. The second was a younger woman with her blonde hair pulled back into a tight braid, her hand resting lightly on her belt as she surveyed the scene. Jake raised his hand in greeting, trying to keep his face neutral. "Morning, officers." Before either could respond, Karen came bustling down the path from the opposite side, her dog yapping hysterically at the deputies. She marched up to them with dramatic urgency, waving her arms. "Thank God you're here," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. "This man is trespassing on HOA land. He's been threatening me. I'm scared for my life." Jake opened his mouth to protest, but the older deputy held up a hand, stopping him. "Ma'am, calm down. We'll sort this out. Why don't you stand over there with Deputy Miller for a moment?" Karen shot Jake a triumphant glare before stepping aside with the female deputy, who guided her a few feet away to take her statement. The older deputy turned back to Jake, pulling off his sunglasses to reveal kind, tired eyes. "Name?" he asked. "Jake Harris," Jake replied. "I own this property. I have the deed in my truck if you need it." The deputy nodded. "That? Be good to see. Karen here says you're on HOA land." Jake blew out a slow breath, fighting the urge to laugh at the absurdity of it all. He walked to his truck, opened the glove compartment, and pulled out a folder containing all his documents. The deputy took it, flipping through the worn pages with practiced efficiency. "Looks in order," he said finally. "This is a private parcel, not HOA governed." Jake felt the knot in his chest loosen slightly. "Thank you, officer. I tried to tell her that, but she wouldn't listen." The deputy handed back the papers and rubbed his forehead. "Yeah. She tends not to. We get calls from her every week. Last month, she reported a teenage boy for harassing wildlife. He was skipping stones." Jake snorted despite himself. "Sounds about right." The deputy's mouth twitched into a brief smile before fading back into professionalism. "She also claimed you're armed." "Anything I should know about?" "Just a camping axe and some tools for cabin repairs," Jake said. "No firearms." The deputy nodded. "Mind if I take a quick look to confirm?" "Of course not," Jake said, gesturing to the tent and cabin. "You're welcome to check everything." While the deputies inspected his site, Karen stood off to the side, whispering furiously into her phone. Her dog continued its relentless barking, straining at its leash to lunge at Jake's boots. Deputy Miller tried to calm her, but Karen was too busy glaring daggers at Jake. Her lips twisted in disgust. After a thorough but brief inspection, the deputies regrouped. The older deputy walked back over to Jake and sighed. "Everything's clear. You're good to go, Mr. Harris." "Thank you," Jake said, relief washing over him. Karen stormed forward, her heels sinking into the damp grass with each furious step. "What do you mean, he's good to go?" she shrieked. "Ha, he's camping illegally. He's lowering the value of every property on this lake." "Ma'am," Deputy Miller said firmly, "this is private land. The HOA has no jurisdiction." Here, Karen's face turned a mottled shade of red. "Do you even know who I am?" "I am the president of Pinebrook Shores HOA. I have lunch with the governor's secretary every quarter. This land is used by the governor himself for private retreats. He does not want people like him here." Her eyes flicked to Jake with such naked contempt that his stomach twisted. He clenched his fists at his sides, trying to remain calm. But the older deputy tilted his head slightly, frowning. "People like him?" he asked quietly. Karen faltered for a moment, then lifted her chin defiantly. "You know what I mean? Squatters, freeloaders, trespassers." Deputy Miller folded her arms. "Mr. Harris has ownership papers for this land going back 50 years. I'd say he's more of a resident than anyone else here." Karen's lips curled. "We'll see about that. I'll call the county zoning board, the governor's team, the state environmental agency." "You're done here," she hissed at Jake. "You think you can just waltz in and ruin this place for real homeowners? I'll have you removed by force if I have to." She spun on her heel and stalked back up the path, her dog waddling after. Her Deputy Miller shook her head in disbelief. "She's intense," Jake said under his breath. "That's one word for it," Deputy Miller replied, hiding a smile. She patted his shoulder lightly. "You're all set. Call us if she comes back causing trouble." Jake thanked them both as they walked back to their SUV, as the crunch of tires faded into the morning hum of cicadas. He stood alone again by the lake, staring at the empty path where Karen had disappeared. His relief was short-lived. Her words about the governor kept echoing in his mind. She'd sounded so confident, so entitled, claiming he camped here every summer. Was she bluffing, or did this land hold more value than he realized? He felt a chill ripple down his spine. Despite the growing warmth of the morning sun, he turned back to his tent, its blue fabric fluttering slightly in the breeze. The lake sparkled beyond, bright and undisturbed, but inside, Jake felt a darkness stirring. He'd thought this would be a quiet weekend of repairs and reflection. Now he knew it was only the beginning of something bigger. As he zipped up his cooler, a plan began to take shape in his mind. He didn't know what Karen's connection to the governor really was, but he was going to find out. Because if she wanted a war over this land, she was about to get one, and this time, he wasn't going to fight fair. Jake spent the rest of the morning tearing moss from the cabin roof. Each yank of green felt oddly satisfying, like stripping away layers of rot that had clung there for years. But no matter how methodical he worked, Karen's words kept echoing. In his skull, the governor camps here every summer. It gnawed at him with the persistence of a horsefly. Refusing to be swatted away, he climbed down from the roof, wiped sweat from his brow, and walked to his truck. His phone was charging on the console. He sat in the driver's seat, flipping through his contacts until he reached one labeled Ben County Records. Ben had been his lifesaver during the deed battle last year. If anyone could unearth whatever Karen was hiding, it was him. Jake dialed, listening to the tinny ring echo against the trees. Finally, Ben answered, his deep voice warm with familiarity. "Jake Harris. Thought you'd be fishing by now." "I wish," Jake said. "Listen, I need a quick favor." "You free?" Ben chuckled. "For you." "Always." "What's up?" Jake explained. Everything as briefly as possible. Karen's threats, her mention of the governor, her obsession with claiming HOA jurisdiction over land she didn't own. There was a short pause on the line. "Funny you say that. I've seen filings from Pinebrook Shores HOA trying to acquire that lakeside strip for over a decade. Always denied because of your grandfather's original easement rights. Why would they want it so badly?" Jake, ask, prestige, control. And if what she says about the governor is true? Well, imagine the kind of campaign donations and political leverage a private retreat for state officials would bring them. Jake's stomach tightened. "Can you find out if the governor really camps here?" "Give me an hour," Ben said. "I'll call you back." Jake ended the call and stepped out into the fresh afternoon breeze. Across the water, sunlight glittered like scattered coins. He watched a heron glide silently over the reeds before vanishing into the trees. Despite the beauty around him, his chest felt heavy. He knew men like Karen, people who thrived on intimidation, control, and false connections. They only understood one thing: exposure. An hour later, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He picked up on the first ring. "Got something for you," Ben said. The governor's office rents a lakeside parcel every July through a private intermediary. But here's the kicker. The rental agreement lists Pinebrook Shores HOA as the management agent, not the actual owner. Jake's pulse kicked up. So Karen's been pocketing rental deposits. Looks that way. Technically, it's fraud, especially if she's claiming to own land she doesn't. You want me to send you the documents? "Please do," Jake said. "And Ben." "Thank you." After ending the call, he scrolled through the PDFs Ben emailed over. There it was, in black and white, annual deposits from the governor's discretionary budget funneled to Pinebrook Shores HOA accounts. Karen had been orchestrating this for years, feeding her own empire of entitlement and greed. Jake stood on the edge of the dock, gripping his phone tightly, listening to the soft slap of waves against old timber. He felt a strange calm settle over him, the same cold clarity he felt before demolishing an unsafe foundation on a job site. People often underestimated him because he didn't scream or threaten. They didn't realize quiet men were the ones who thought strategically. He called his friend Sam next, a local reporter who ran a small but fierce independent news page. "This is going to sound insane," Jake began. Then he laid out everything: the fraudulent rentals, the threats, Karen's harassment. By the time he finished, Sam was practically vibrating with excitement. "Jake, this is gold. Fraud, misuse of public funds, intimidation. I'll be there first thing tomorrow. Can you get proof on camera?" "That's the plan," Jake said. That night, he didn't sleep in the tent. He sat by the dying embers of his fire, watching the moon cast pale ripples across the lake. His phone sat beside him, recording notes into a private audio log for evidence. He detailed Karen's threats word for word. He outlined her forged claims. By the time dawn broke, mist curling silver and silent over the water, he felt sharper than he had in years. When the sun rose fully, he went to the local hardware store. He bought 2 small wildlife cameras with motion sensors, the kind hunters used to monitor game trails. He set them up carefully, one tucked into a maple tree facing the tent and cabin clearing, the other nestled between rocks near the dock. Then he waited. At precisely 10:34 a.m., the path rustled with forced urgency. Karen emerged, flanked by 2 HOA board members wearing polo shirts embroidered with the association's pine tree logo. They moved like security detail, puffed up with self-importance. Karen wore oversized sunglasses despite the shade of the trees. Her lips curled into a victorious smile when she saw Jake standing calmly by his tent. "Still here, I see," she sneered. "Did you enjoy your last night on this land?" Jake didn't respond. His heart thudded in his chest, but he kept his face expressionless. One of the board members, a pudgy man with thinning hair, cleared his throat. "Mr. Harris, the HOA board has voted unanimously to pursue forced removal of your illegal structure. Consider this your final notice." "Illegal structure?" Jake asked quietly. "The tent," Karen spat. "And the derelict shack you call a cabin. It violates aesthetic and environmental codes." Jake tilted his head slightly, watching her through narrowed eyes. "And what exactly does the governor think about your plans to demolish his annual retreat spot?" For the first time, Karen's confident mask slipped. Her eyes darted to the board members before snapping back to him. "Don't you dare speak his name. You don't know anything." Jake felt adrenaline surge through his veins. "I know you've been forging management documents and collecting rental deposits for years. I know you're committing fraud by posing as the owner of this land. And I know that every word you've said today is being recorded." Karen's face drained of color as her gaze darted frantically around the clearing. The pudgy board member shifted uncomfortably. The other man, tall, with iron gray hair, stepped forward. "Is this true, Karen?" "Of course not," she snapped. "He's bluffing. He's a squatter. A liar." Jake didn't move. He let the silence grow heavy until even the birds seemed to stop singing. The tension in the clearing thickened until it felt like wet cement. Then, faintly at first, he heard engines approaching, heavy tires crunching gravel. Black SUVs pulled up along the narrow dirt track. Men in dark suits stepped out, scanning the scene with quick, professional eyes. Behind them emerged a man Jake recognized instantly from the news, Governor Lane. Tall and broad-shouldered, wearing khakis and a navy polo, his silver hair ruffling in the breeze. Karen's mouth fell open. Her sunglasses slipped down her nose as she scrambled to compose herself. "Governor Lane," she exclaimed breathlessly, striding forward with open arms. "Welcome back to your private retreat. We were just dealing with a trespasser situation. Please, let me escort you to the dock." Governor Lane looked at her without the slightest flicker of recognition or gratitude. His gaze shifted to Jake, eyes sharp with intelligence honed from decades in politics. "And you are?" he asked. Calmly, Jake forced himself to smile despite the hammering of his heart. "I'm the owner of this property, sir. Jake Harris." My grandfather built this cabin in 1968. The governor's eyebrows lifted slightly. He glanced at Karen. I thought Pinebrook Shores HOA managed this land. Jake held his breath as Karen stammered, her cheeks flushing crimson. The board members looked away, silent and ashamed. Governor Lane's frown deepened, his gaze flicking between Jake, the tent, and the trembling woman before him. The air crackled with unspoken consequences. Jake could feel victory inching closer with each passing second, but he knew the final blow hadn't landed yet. That would come soon, and when it did, Karen would finally understand what it meant to wage war against a man with nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Governor Lane's eyes locked onto Karen's with a cold precision that silenced the rustling leaves and distant birdsong. The suited security agents hovered around him, scanning the tree line and lake out of habit, but his focus never wavered. From the trembling woman in front of him, "Karen," he said quietly, each syllable slicing the humid morning air. "You told my staff this land was managed by Pinebrook Shores HOA, that this was part of your regulated lakeside parcels. Is that true?" Her lips quivered. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The two HOA board members took a step away from her, as if her shame were contagious. Jake felt the breeze ripple across his sweat-damp shirt. He kept silent, though every nerve in his body burned with triumph. His cameras were recording every second, capturing the governor's confusion, Karen's panic, and the humiliating unraveling of her lies. The tall, iron-haired board member cleared his throat, his voice shaking as he spoke. "Governor Lane, we were under the impression that Ms. Blake's documentation was verified. She assured us these rentals were cleared through county records." The governor's eyes narrowed, his brows knitting in a sharp frown. "So you never confirmed ownership yourselves?" Karen let out a brittle laugh, her voice cracking at the edges. "Governor, please, let me explain. This squatter is lying. He forged those documents. He's just trying to steal your retreat site for himself. We've spent years maintaining these grounds for you. Maintaining." Jake cut in, his tone calm but laced with steel. "Oh, you mean threatening the legal owner with false police reports, calling armed officers on a private citizen, intimidating me with fraud and harassment, because that's what I've documented for the last 48 hours. Would you like to see the footage, Governor?" He reached into his back pocket and held up his phone, showing the connected live feed from his hidden wildlife cameras. Karen's shrill voice echoed faintly from the recording, shrieking threats about removal by force and claiming the governor himself would destroy Jake's life for daring to pitch a tent. Her face blanched as she saw her own twisted rage loop. On screen, she lunged forward, fingers clawing for his phone, but a suited security agent stepped swiftly between them, blocking her with a silent warning glance. Governor Lane sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. His expression was not angry. It was weary, the look of a man who had dealt with far too many snakes in his lifetime. He turned to Jake, extending a hand. "Mr. Harris, I apologize for this fiasco. Your grandfather's cabin was one of my favorite quiet places when I first entered politics. I assumed management was formalized when Pinebrook Shores approached my team years ago." Jake took his hand and shook it firmly. "No apology necessary, sir. I just wanted to keep my family's land in peace. I didn't even know you camped here until yesterday." The governor's faint smile carried genuine warmth. "I'm glad it's still in good hands." Karen let out a sob of frustration, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "You can't just take his side. I've spent years curating this lake's image. I've kept squatters out, kept it clean, kept it exclusive. This is my community." Karen," the governor interrupted, his voice low but edged with finality. "I don't need exclusivity. I need honesty. My office will be contacting the County Fraud Division this afternoon to investigate these false rental filings. For now, I think it's best you leave Mr. Harris alone. Permanently. She staggered backwards, her knees buckling as the pudgy board member caught her arm to steady her. The iron-haired man wouldn't even look at her. Her little dog yipped anxiously, confused by the collapsing empire around it. Jake felt his pulse, slowing, his lungs filling with clean, pine-scented air again. The lake sparkled under the full mid-morning sun, golden ripples weaving across its calm surface. Governor Lane nodded to his security team, gesturing towards the dock. As they moved off to set up his fishing gear, he turned back one last time. "If you ever decide to rent out the cabin officially," he said with a wry smile, "my staff has my checkbook on standby." Jake chuckled softly. "I'll keep that in mind, sir." Karen let out another choked sob, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. The governor's convoy moved towards the dock, leaving the HOA members standing awkwardly beside her, silent and humiliated. Jake slipped his phone back into his pocket and walked to his tent. He crouched down, unzipped the flap, and felt the morning breeze drift through the small canvas space. For the first time in days, his chest felt light. As he stood up, he caught the faint vibration of a notification. Pulling out his phone, he saw Sam's text. "Footage is live. 10,000 views in 3 minutes. Title: HOA Karen screams at governor's host. You're a hero." He laughed out loud, a rich, deep sound that startled a squirrel from a nearby oak. The irony was too sweet to ignore. He imagined Karen's meltdown going viral, her shrieking face immortalized in thousands of memes across the state. Maybe someone would even add her barking dog as background commentary. The thought sent another ripple of laughter through him. He rolled his shoulders back, feeling every knot of tension dissolve. The sun warmed his skin as the wind shifted, bringing with it the scent of fresh water and pine. Down by the dock, Governor Lane cast his first fishing line into the shimmering lake, the lure arcing through the air like a silver comet before vanishing beneath rippling waves. Jake looked back towards the tree line where Karen stood, her shoulders slumped in utter defeat. She met his eyes for the briefest moment, her gaze burning with impotent rage before she turned away, dragging her dog behind her, the rattling leash sounding like chains across the quiet earth. He smiled faintly, then reached down to brush dirt from his jeans. His grandfather's cabin stood behind him, solid and weathered but unbroken, just like the man who built it and just like the grandson who now defended it as the sun rose higher. Melting the last scraps of dawn mist, Jake walked towards the cabin with renewed purpose. Today, he would finish the roof. Tomorrow, he'd repaint the door. And someday soon, maybe he'd sit on that same dock with his own child or grandchild, teaching them to cast lines into this peaceful, silent lake. Because some places were never meant to be owned by HOA boards or used as trophies by politicians. They were meant to remain what they were at dawn. Quiet sanctuaries where a man could feel human again, where dignity and family roots mattered more than any bylaw or fraudulent title. He smiled softly as he watched a hawk circle high above the pine canopy, the morning breeze tousling his hair. Karen was gone. The governor was fishing peacefully. And for the first time in far too long, Jake Harris felt like he truly belonged in this world again.